If your team's trying to move faster with AI or scale more efficiently without reinventing the wheel, InfoQ Dev Summit Munich 2025 this October 15 to 16 might help. It's a practical event. Talks from people in the trenches, sharing what they've actually shipped, fixed, or learned. No big launches or buzzwords, just useful ideas you can take back to your team the next day. Learn more at devsummit.infoq.com. Good day, folks. This is Shane Hastie for the InfoQ Engineering Culture Podcast. And we're having great fun getting started today, but I'm sitting down with Idan, Gazit, and Eddie Aftandilian. Did I get that close enough?
Success. Yes. That was good.
Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
You're both from GitHub Next. What's GitHub Next?
That's an excellent question. Where what would normally be called a long bets team or an innovation team or a labs team, I like to describe us as the department of fool around and find out, because we're there to try things. It says research on the door, but the reality is that we're a prototyping team.
I mean, when we first started, we did a lot of things, but we pretty quickly focused down on AI. And, as Idan said, our job is to prototype new ideas and test viability. And if we come across something that looks like it might be viable, help it graduate out and become a real GitHub product.
And before we go deeper into the team and the products, who's Eddie? Who's Idan?
Okay, I'll go first.
For it.
I'm Eddie. I'm a principal researcher in Next. I lead and manage about half of Next, and Idan manages the other half. My half is sort of the more sort of researchy focused people in Next. So we have people who have backgrounds in machine learning and programming languages. We kind of bring, I guess, the rigor to Next projects. So, Idan's half of the team, I'm going to step on your toes here, but Idan's half of the team is sort of more front end, like developer experience focused. They build like really cool prototypes of things, and we demo those things. And sometimes, people get excited about the demos. But in this AI world, it can be very easy to build something that's cool and actually really hard to make it work for real as a tool. And I see the goal of my wing of the team is like taking these cool ideas and making them work reliably. Sometimes that involves things like building evaluations that we can use to measure how reliably these things work, and then we can drive them up. Sometimes it involves taking results from the research literature and then applying them to Next projects, so making this match between things that are already known in the research literature with like actual problems that we have. And then sometimes it involves actually coming up with new techniques to solve some problem that we have in a prototype or a real GitHub product. I've been in GitHub Next for about 4 years. I joined at the sort of very beginning of the Copilot project. So I joined to work on Copilot. I was one of the original Copilot team members. I helped take it from this original hacky prototype all the way to general availability. I worked on it for about a year and a half. I ended up for a while leading quality evaluation and improvement for Copilot for about a year. And then I came back to Next to work on new projects. Before that, I spent 10 years at Google working on internal developer tools. And before that, I did my PhD in programming languages at Tufts University in Boston. And so the sort of through line of my career has always been about developer tools, building tools to help developers be happier and more productive.
Hi, my name's Idan. That's a tough act to follow, Eddie. I currently lead GitHub Next, but for the most of the time that I've been here, I joined about 5 years ago, so just a little bit before Eddie. And for most of the time that I've been at Next, he and I have sort of been peer managers running. Now I run the group, but we still sort of have our domains of expertise. And like Eddie says, my entire career has also been about developer tools. Prior to GitHub, I was at Heroku, and I was a core contributor to the Django web framework and spent a lot of my life in and around open source and generally speaking, around web technologies is sort of my home base. But interaction design, interfaces, user experiences, cognition, perception, these are the things that are generally my jam. And nowadays, in the context of GitHub Next, it's exactly what Eddie said. It's bringing both halves of the house to bear on these problems. And I think something that's interesting about Next is that we don't execute along reporting lines. Like, it's not that Eddie's folks are working on Eddie's projects and my folks are working on my, and ne'er the twain shall meet. Instead, it's most challenges, to overcome them or to really advance the state of the art, we have to bring in some folks that have the hard background in machine learning, and maybe we need to train a model, or we need custom techniques into the models. But then we also need to create the right interface to that and use that to elicit information from the humans using it that is going to make the AI succeed at their thing. So it's this very interdisciplinary squad. It's a real joy. It's one of the most unique teams I've ever seen anywhere, and a privilege to work alongside everyone. I think that's all the stuff that matters to me. You'll hear me rant a lot about nouns and interfaces, and I'm really into typography and color and all of those things. But yeah, I'm a straight up nerd.
What's it take to hold a team like that together?
We have a cycle, that we've now gone through a number of times. And not all parts of the cycle are fun. Like, it sounds really great. It's the team of permanent hack week, right? Like, nobody's saying like, listen, here's the Gantt chart, go execute. In fact, generally speaking, Next it's an undirected exploration function of the business. If GitHub's leadership wants something, they can direct like parts of the business to do something. But in our case, what I think is expected of us is that we need to create options for them. We need to roll up to them with like, here's a bet that the business could make, and here's the evidence that supports this bet, right? Like, we can't roll up to them with a doc and a philosophy. We have to roll up with something qualified that's going to persuade them to spend the resources, not the 15 people that are Next, but, the much bigger, broader GitHub. And so we have this cycle, and we've now been through it enough times that there's some pattern. The first part of the cycle is this blank canvas dread phase of we don't know what we're making, and we're trying to find something, like which spot do we dig in, where do we see glints of gold. And so I'd say in that phase, the thing to sort of inspire and rally the team is setting sort of, maybe it's direction setting is the word that I'm looking for. It's saying like, these are the strategic directions that are valuable for us to be digging in. And figuring out what those are is not easy. It's quite a bit of prognostication about where the tech is going and where the market is likely to be in a year or two. Because at the end of the day, if what we want to do is make things that graduate and escape the lab, then they need to have a business future. It can't just be like, oh, this is a technically beautiful thing, but I don't know what application it has that people are willing to trade money for. So that's the hard phase. And then the rest, like once we've sort of selected projects, that's the happy phase. There, it's like, I think folks are internally driven because they're excited for the making. And ironically, that doesn't require much in the way of pushing at all, because we hire people that have this 0 to 1 mindset. It makes hiring very difficult because it's this very intangible quality. If I go up to my recruiter, they'll be like, what do you want? You want a front-end engineer? You want a back-end engineer? I'm like, I want people who make. And they're like, I don't know how to filter that in a resume. And I'm like, I know, that's really hard, but that's what I need. And so by hiring correctly, that second phase becomes like a lot easier. And then the third phase is the storytelling, the going to market, the evaluation, and the research on the things. We field a prototype, and then we've got to go and study how people use it, what value are they getting out of it, because that's the evidence that I need to produce in order to roll up to leadership and say, here's what. So it's different things that we need at different phases of this cycle.
I mean, the thing about sort of hiring the people with this 0 to 1 mindset is important. And I think it's important when we make a point when we hire to communicate what this is really like to people, because it can sound it's like all sunshine and rainbows and it's always exploration, but actually like the exploration, like you said, is it's often the hardest part where you're trying a bunch of stuff. Most of it doesn't work because that's the nature of what we do. Like we try to set ambitious goals and then I don't know, I think we say like 80% of the stuff we try doesn't actually work. And that part can be really demotivating. And if you're not willing to sort of stick it out and have trust in the process, I don't know, you can get pretty down. And it's important to know like what you're actually getting yourself into when you join Next.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I might add something onto that is that maybe the hardest kind of classification that we have to do in that early phase is not even when it's clearly not working. That's an easy classification to make.
Yeah.
The hard part is like, what if it's cool and like it might be good, but we don't know if it's really going to be good. And then how do you distinguish the things that are the potentials from the real deal? And I wish I had a flowchart for that, but I don't. Every experiment has its own parameters.
You can get distracted by the coolness of something, right? You said like in the end, we need to produce something that people want to trade money for. And, you know, often the cool thing is not exactly that. So like it's a hard process to go through.
Yeah. Also, you have to let go of everything that you make. You know, another thing that I've learned over the years of like hiring folks into Next is that in the hiring process, I'm like, listen, every time you succeed, you're going to give your baby up for adoption. And like, that's what success looks like, right? It's you hand it off and you hope that it has a good life, but you can't guarantee it. And on occasion, we've had at least one or two folks that have gone with, they're like, no, I want to keep working on this in perpetuity. Yeah. And this is maybe the happiest form of attrition we experience at a group like Next is when somebody's just like, nope, I want to stick around for the lifetime of this baby and see it grow up. Then they depart with the thing into engineering. And that's a win all around for the business. We're sad for the loss to our team, but it is strictly in the good column for the overall business. But that's something that I have to be upfront about, because for the things that we try and don't work out is like, we hand it off in the good case or we shelve it, which is the other core activity that we engage in the team is not fooling ourselves when something isn't working, because opportunity cost. If it's not working, maybe it'll work in a year or two when the models get better, when we have another brainstorm and come up with a better technique. I don't know. But right now it's not working. Instead of us throwing quote unquote good money after bad, let's stick it on the shelf and turn our attention to something else. And that kind of honesty is really hard, particularly when you've spent the last month really, scrabbling with your fingernails to find purchase on a topic, to then be like, you know what, I give up on this can feel like a punch to the gut, but that's the job. So
can you tell us a story of something that looked really interesting, but then just didn't make it?
I have one. Which is blocks. This one was very personal to me. I was the one who led this thing, and I was the one who had to kill it when it didn't take off. And so blocks was not even really an AI specific thing. It was this notion of what if we could make GitHub itself extensible? Beyond, everybody's seen now, it's like if you have a markdown file in GitHub, you don't see the raw markdown, you see the rendered markdown. And if you have a mermaid diagram in GitHub, you see the mermaid chart, you don't see the source of it. So we were like, okay, let's take this concept way further and be able to have like small applications that you could publish, that you could then view your repository instead of seeing a list of files, see it another way, or have like small applications in your repository. So it's not a full-on, platform for deploying applications like a Firebase or a Vercel or a Heroku or whatever, but miniature apps specifically tied to your code bases. And we had a lot of, great early signal from the earliest of early adopters. We have a Discord, and the kinds of folks who self-select into like, I want to play with tomorrow's tools today, and I'm willing to endure a lot of stuff being broken for the privilege. And so they came along and they made a lot of really cool blocks, we call them, these like miniature applications. But at the end, it never crossed the chasm. It never achieved that sort of breakout status, even though there were definitely customers that were asking us like, hey, we'd really like to extend GitHub. Is there ways of doing that? And there are extension points for GitHub, but nothing that lets you really affect the user experience of GitHub itself. And so we shut it down, with a heavy heart and everything. I sent out the shutdown email, and that was awful. And I'm glad that we did it. But I think that's a good example of, killing your darlings in exchange for being able to pursue new darlings. So that's my example of something that didn't pan out.
And what about something that did? And what happened with it?
I mean, Copilot is the big one, right? So Copilot was created within our team. It was the first big success for Next. It was huge, and it did turn out to be huge. We didn't know that at the time, but it started within the team. It started out as a collaboration with OpenAI, where we got access to their code generation models, which were distinct from their other models at the time. And we were sort of tasked with figuring out, well, how do we make this thing actually useful to people? And so we built different interfaces. The one that was obviously the right interface for it was this code completion in your IDE in VS Code format. Once we landed on that, it turned into sort of a product, like a productionization march. And for that project, we did most of that within Next. So all Next projects that succeed, we take to technical preview, which means it's like a closed preview, usually behind a wait list. People have to apply, and we select them as we have capacity. And we usually do that within the team. And as Idan mentioned, we start at that point doing user studies and collecting data about what users do, collecting survey feedback in order to make a case about whether to take this to full production or not. Yeah, so we usually do that within the team. We did that for Copilot. And then, once we hit the technical preview phase, it became pretty clear to everyone that this was going to graduate and become a real project. And at that point, the team started growing. About halfway through that cycle, we were moved into GitHub engineering. So those of us started in Next on Copilot, moved into engineering. We went on loan. I was on loan for 9 months to engineering. We helped take it all the way to general availability. And we also helped build the team there. We did the hiring and such that would make it a sustainable project within GitHub. And then we came back to Next for the next round of projects.
You made the point, there's no crystal ball. How do you choose the beds?
Well, first of all, I think when you say a statement like, how do you choose, it implies that there's this one checkpoint. It's like here's the do or die line. Beyond it, we got to do it. And the reality is that it's almost never that. It's almost always a ramp. The moments where you look at something and you're like, oh snap, that is definitely going to be a thing. Those are few and far between. I think original Copilot was the strongest I've ever felt that about anything, where it's just, you look at it and you're like, this is the future. I'm not going to work without this in the future. The rest of the time you have, sort of mixed signals. And so the way that we structure our explorations are that effectively every exploration kind of has a dead man switch on it, in the sense that it's always about to run out of its lease on life. And at any moment, we're always asking ourselves, what is the strongest small piece of evidence that we can produce in this iteration that's going to persuade us to extend this project's lease on life? So right now it's, can we get to a chewing gum and duct tape prototype that we could kick the tires on ourselves? And then we're dog fooding it heavily and using it and being like, do we believe in it or not? And then we're done with the kind of validation that we can do just ourselves. It's time to expose it to more people. Well, there's, quite a large business of developers at GitHub, some of whom are like, yeah, I want to play around with something that may or may not ever be good. So we'll go to them and we'll be like, hey, who wants to kick the tires on this and give us feedback? We have external developers that are close to GitHub, like the GitHub Stars program. These tend to be prominent open source developers and personalities and folks like that. And so we can go to them, and show off things that are not ready for the light of day, but because they're already under NDA, with GitHub, we're able to show them, give them early access to things. And so we'll try it out on them and get signal from them and make sure that they find it valuable, that they find that it does something that they want it to do. And then this sort of the apex of this curve is the public technical preview that all projects need to get to. That there will open up a wait list and will enroll folks, anyone from the general public who wants to play around with this, and then we'll conduct user research on them. And so it's not like, how do we decide? In the early phases, it's maybe that's where the decision making around direction happens. And in the later phases, it's more sort of evidence-based around what we're hearing back. But in those early phases, I'd say part of it is, again, it's hiring. It's hiring people that have a lot of experience. Next is a very unusual team in the sense that everybody at Next is at the top end of the experience scale. Our most junior member is a senior, which is highly aberrant. There are no other teams at GitHub that I've ever seen that look this way. But I think that it's fair and correct because we're sticking on the backs of these individual contributors. We're telling them, go advance the state of the art. Don't mess it up. Bye. And we're not giving them a whole lot of guidance. And so because they're experienced, I trust them to execute. But beyond that, I'm also asking them to bring their experience and their opinions with them to work. And then inside our house, in our private Slack channel, we're arguing with one another. Like, that's a good idea. That's a terrible idea. Or like, what if we tried it this way? And we have to have that trust and that candor internally in order to be able to really wrestle with these ideas. And so people are making these small spikes, and these innovations can come from anyone on the team. It's not like I put together some PowerPoint, I show it to the team, and I say, we're going to do this. It usually doesn't look like that. It usually looks more like individuals on the team are putting forward miniature things that they've put together. Like yesterday, I played around with the models. I was trying to get them to do something, and I did this. What do you think? And then we'll do demo day every Thursday where anybody from the team will do demos. And then I guess it feels a little bit like a jazz band, like everybody's trying out things, and suddenly somebody plays a really cool lick, and then everybody's just like, whoa, 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 that was really good. Go do that again. And so the first signal that we're looking for is our own excitement, because sometimes that's the only signal that we can possibly have when it's novel things. There is no prior art to compare it to. So I don't know, that's messy, but I think that that's the reality on the ground.
There's something like very magical that happens when, someone shows a demo and everyone else gets excited. And as Idan said, like Next is pretty undirected, like especially in this exploration phase, people can kind of wander around and work on what they want to work on. And when you start to see people sort of gravitating towards someone else's demo or a project, I think like we both take that as a super positive sign that there's something there. These people sort of voting with their feet for what they want to work on and what they want to invest their time in.
Yeah. The first customer we have to persuade is ourselves. Like, if we're excited about it, then that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be a thing, but it's a healthy early signal. And I can't underscore enough the currency of demos at Next. Demos are everything. It's like nobody is going to sell anybody else on a notion just with a doc. You have to actually make something, show something, let other people use it. Even if it's messy and terrible, and it doesn't matter. Like, we're all comfortable with messy and terrible, but that's the genesis of great ideas. It always starts out as something messy and terrible.
So in that creative space, how are you using generative AI tools?
I feel like I spend most of my time interacting with the APIs of through building things to try out, can the model do something, or using our own tools. I can't say that I'm a super intense user of every generative AI tool out there. Like everybody else, I use quite a bit of the straight up ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. And also in the context of my job, I feel like I need to stay on top of what are the models good at, which is a horse race, right? Today, this model seems to be the best at producing code, but that one seems to be good at, I don't know, Gemini, for example, has famously sort of the longest context window of all of the models. But if you fill up that context window to the brim, does it actually behave well, or does it start to forget later in the context window. Well, that's something that you can't read on a spec sheet. You have to get a feel for it by working with it. So I feel like most of my use of generative AI ends up being these kinds of testing out the vibes of the models to see if what they're good at or what they appear to be strong at, or are they chatty? Like I remember there was one of the releases of OpenAI's models. We were like, wow, this version is really chatty. It seems to really want to like add a lot of comments to code. And we have to actually alter the prompts that we give it to tell it to shut up with the comments, please. So things like that, I feel like end up being my primary uses for AI. But otherwise, yeah, chat like everybody else. LLM is informational alchemist, converting from any format to any other format. Take small text and make it big. Take big text and make it small. Take a diagram, make it text, or the other way around. Those are the natural applications of AI to my mind. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that.
I think for me, the most interesting use that I have that is like fairly new is this bespoke tutor use of chat models. Let's say I have a research paper or something and I want to like deeply understand it. I can drop that into ChatGPT or Claude and then start asking it pretty difficult questions about the paper. And it's pretty good at explaining stuff to me. And I find this especially helpful for when I'm going out of my domain. So like I mentioned, my background is in programming languages. Maybe I want to understand deeply, something from a machine learning paper. I find the models really helpful for understanding stuff like that. And then the other thing that's been true actually for a long time is like when you're programming in a new framework or a new programming language, like the models are super helpful for that, right? When I joined GitHub, it's really a Java developer. Like I hadn't written TypeScript. I'd written a little Python, but not as a work job like level of proficiency in Python. And I come here and, most of our projects are in TypeScript or Python. And I found even very early Copilot super helpful for teaching me basic syntax, teaching me idioms of the language, right? So like, what's the idiomatic way to do this? I know one way to do it, but if I write it that way, it's going to look like I've just transcribed Java into Python, which I know is not what a Python programmer would do. So I find for a long time, I found them super useful for this kind of like, I'm well grounded in like this language or this framework. Now help me translate the concepts from that language into this new framework or language that I'm trying to work in.
Yeah, big +1 to the new languages, new frameworks thing. I like making weird keyboards, and I like it enough that I fell down the rabbit hole and I'm like, okay, none of the existing firmwares for the microcontrollers for custom keyboards are exactly what I want. I know I'm going to write my own one, right? This is perennial sort of side project that is still going on 2 years later. But I was like, but I don't want to write C. It's been years since I've written C. I want to do what the cool kids are doing, and the cool kids are doing a lot of Rust. And it turns out that you can write Rust for bare metal nowadays. And without Copilot, man, it would have been really hard. But with this suggestion tool in my pocket, even if I don't use the suggestion as it is verbatim, just having it shine a flashlight or show off idioms or tell me like this is how I would use this library or things like that is incredibly invaluable for me, as a working developer, 100%.
Jens, we've covered a lot of ground and it's been really, really interesting. If people want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
The Next Discord, if you go to gh.io/next-discord, that's definitely sort of our community of early adopters, people who love to injure themselves on the sharp edges of whatever it is that we're making. We love it both as a community of folks who are really interested in this sort of a community of futurists, a community of folks who are interested in tools for thought, because at the end of the day, software development is thought made real. And folks that we tend to come to first when we want feedback, when we want to field something. And so that's probably the best way. We're also GitHubNext.com. You can see we try to work as much as possible in the open. So folks can see all of our past projects and write-ups there. And of course, we have a Twitter and a Blue Sky account. They're all linked from the GitHubNext.com website. So yeah, I think those are the good spots to meet us.
thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. We really appreciate you for
thank
having
you.
us on.
This was fun.